My name is Beatrice Erkers, and I run the Existential Hope program at an organization called the Foresight Institute. So the Foresight Institute is a non-profit that works to advance technologies. And since a few years ago, we also started this program called the Existential Hope program, because we also want to think about why we're creating the technologies, like what futures are we trying to create with the technologies. And so I think that's a really, really important question to ask. And I also think it's really important to think about not just the risk scenarios, but also what are the positive scenarios and applications that we can have with technologies and just of the future in general. And so today on this panel, we're going to talk a little bit about that. And yeah, let's just start with introducing ourselves. César, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Hi, thank you for being here. My name is César Santivañez. I'm a science fiction editor from Lima, from Peru. I work with topics like native innovation, the indigenous futures, post-capitalism. We work with science fiction in translation. It's very important for us to give the readers the wide sense of science fiction. So we translate for more than 14 languages. So far we have published stories from Turkey, Greece, China, Nigeria. So that's our main thing. And we work with positive futures as well. And yeah, that's what we do at the magazine.
I'm Anders Sandberg. I'm originally trained as a computer scientist, but I'm one of those annoying students who study everything but what they're supposed to be studying. So I ended up doing a bit of neural networks and a bit of psychology, and then I ended up at the Future of Humanity Institute in Oxford, where I technically became a philosopher, thinking about the ethics of emerging technologies, but also getting involved in the work on existential risk. And a lot of the questions, what can we say about the long-range future? These days, I'm still partially in Oxford, but also at the Institute for Future Studies in Stockholm, which is doing a little bit more applied future studies. And my big interest is really try to see how big can we think about the future? What are the crucial considerations that we should try to figure out early that can help us guide in what direction we want to move?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tatiana. I'm the founder at Goumbook. Goumbook is a social enterprise that was started back in 2009, so 16 years ago, with the idea of a better future. We drive sustainability and climate action across the UAE and beyond in the MENA region. And it's about awareness, education, putting that seed in people's mind that we have challenges that we face today and that we can actually take action for a better future for ourselves, but specifically for future generations.
And I should also say with this panel that we put together that we wanted to have like quite diverse perspectives. And so we have a sci-fi author, we have a scientist, and we have a social entrepreneur. So all people that are sort of working to envision and create the future, but in different ways and with different approaches. So I will start with just asking you, when I say the word existential hope, what does that mean to you guys?
Well, for me, it means activism. My way to conceive science fiction is through political activism. So what we do is very entangled with a social approach of science fiction. So in the Future Fiction magazine in Español, our magazine, we don't do there are great stories about that, but we don't do alien invasions, time travel, space operas. We do near future stories, and that happens in a time lapse of 5 to 10 years. And one of our main goals is to give people the right to think about the future in their own languages, because in the end, the way that we think about the future, the language defines so much about the way we think about our future. So that's where it's very important for us, for giving the people this power. And then we also work with, have some projects in the short term to work with invisibilized population. We want to be listeners first and then writers. We want to work with children and with older adults. We want to ask them, I think we're not asking the right question to the right people. So we want to conceive writers as a tool, not as this big author we want to make an activism through science fiction. So yeah, that's the way we cope with existential hope.
Great, activism.
So for me, it's the opposite to some extent to existential risk. So much of my research has been about existential risk, which at the end of the world, ways humanity could go extinct or something equally bad, threats really to our future potential as a species. And quite often I get the question, but how can you sleep at night dealing with these things? And my answer is, well, I think there's a good chance that they don't happen. And I'm trying to reduce the risk of these disasters happening. But the opposite to existential risk might not be security. That's an important thing. We might want to make sure that the world is not vulnerable to nuclear war or bioweapons or badly aligned AI. But there might also be unexpected opportunities, just like a disaster is a surprisingly bad thing that happens. Although, in retrospect, we all quite often realize we did know that that was about to happen, we just didn't do anything about it. There are also these catastrophes, the things that are surprisingly good. In history, we have many surprises where scientific discoveries have given us cures for diseases. We have discovered things about ourselves and the world that made it better, even though we were bad at predicting that beforehand. So for me, existential hope is the hope that there might be these opportunities. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be fixing the bad stuff, but we also need to search for things that could be unexpectedly great. So that is, for me, what existential hope is about, to culture that openness for the good surprises.
From my end, I would like to actually reference to the late Jane Goodall, who used to say that hope was not a passive thing, but really embodied action. So the opposite of hope is actually despair. When we are desperate, it's because we can't do anything anymore. So hope is really about taking action. For us, when we talk about sustainability and climate and nature, we try as much as possible for people to understand the very important link between humans and nature. And we want to give people hope that we can continue this relationship and thrive with nature. It's very difficult to explain to everyone that our future might not be very positive if the nature we know today is going to change. We often hear, save the planet. And it's actually not about saving the planet. The planet is going to evolve, nature is going to evolve, but we as a species might not be able to evolve with nature. And so this is where there is a threat, the existential threat of humanity not being able to survive. And this is where hope comes into place. And as a social enterprise working in the Middle East, in the UAE, it's always been about talking about the challenges we face today, but also looking at the solutions. And in order to drive action, we need to give individual businesses, governments, everyone, solutions. And we can work in a collaborative way through partnership, through collaboration to find these solutions. So really, existential hope for me is working all together through action to guarantee that not only us, but our children and their children will be able to continue thriving on this planet.
Yeah, I should say also that part of the reason that we started this program is we're a nonprofit based in the US, and it's really it feels quite tangible that a lot of people, especially young people, don't really feel very hopeful for the future. I saw some recent statistics on Gen Z's sort of view on if they think they were going to have a better life than their parents. And I think in the US, it was like the highest of the Western countries, and that was 30% thought so, which is staggeringly low, I think. And like in other countries in Europe, it was like France was, I think, 8%. So that's like over 90% of people think it's going to get worse. And firstly, I don't think that's necessarily accurate. Like, I think we're in a much better position in many ways to actually create a much better future. And so that's my question for you is a little bit like, is it different in different regions? Because I come from Europe and the US, so Is it different where you come from, César, or Tatiana? Is it different here?
Do you mean how the youth feel with future?
Yeah.
Yes, because at least where I come from Peru, is a very fragmented country. We have the coast, it is a desert, we have the Andes, the mountains, and we have the Amazon. And each population has its ways to conceive future. There's a very interesting thing when the Andean peoples talk about the future, they use these Quechua terms called Quipapacha, the time of the back. Because for Quechua people, the future is on the back because you can't not see the future. You can only see your past. And doing real actions, you can redefine your path through a future that you will not be able to see. And we are in this kind of struggle right now because we want to empower populations to think about their own way to narrate, to tell stories, because we are being using the same model, Aristotelian model, from the 4th century. So we've been using the same way to tell stories that are 17 centuries old, the hero's journey. But if you research in the oldest way to tell stories in Latin America or in every ancient cultures, we have this thing that is like a systemic storytelling. And these kind of young people want to come back to this system, but we as teachers and future educators, maybe we're not letting them to tell the stories the way they want to tell us. They think about systemic narrative systems. So animals are part of the society, of the story. They get rid of this hero thing, and it's a community thing. So there are many solutions in that systems, but we are not hearing them, and the youth wants to express across these narrative systems. So they feel about the future that way.
Mm-hmm.
I agree that there is a very important element in the culture and heritage. Around the world, we feel and we know different things, and we face them in a different way. Also, I think, always related to nature and sustainability, there's a different level also of awareness. And sometimes the mistake is to tell, for example, the Middle East that polar bears are going to get extinct. And so we need to create a connection with the challenge that we're facing for the future. So for us, it was always very important to make sure that the narrative around climate change and biodiversity was linked to being in this region. So we need to look at the nature we have around us. We need to look at the desert, at the sea. We need to understand how important these ecosystems are. And we cannot have the same narrative we would have in the US or in Asia. Very simple example, for example, mangroves. We have beautiful mangrove forests here in the GCC. Very similar to South America and Asia also have massive mangrove forests, but they're very different, and they provide very different ecosystem services, and they have a very different impact on the community. So the way I'm going to talk about those forests need to be different, and this is where I really like also using comics and the culture of interaction and learning in different ways, because we cannot have one story fits all for everyone, and the culture and heritage are very, very important.
Anders, you always say that optimism is the new punk.
Yeah. These days, it's actually a fairly easy way of standing out and being a bit rebellious at a panel, saying, oh yes, I believe the future is going to be glorious. It's not normally what you hear. And part of that, I think, is that the story, my 30-second version of the history of ideas in Western Europe is something like, the Enlightenment shows up, says the future can be better. We can use rational thinking and technology to make it better. People start the modern project and then realize, oh dear, we got better at war. We got better at oppression. We got better at destroying the environment. And from that follows a very natural critique that let's not do that. The naive view of progress is dangerous. Unfortunately, then people stop thinking and says progress is dangerous. The idea that progressing is a good thing must be critiqued gets turned into we should stop the idea of progress. You have various versions of it. You have a postmodern idea that recognizes multiple perspectives, but you always end up with everybody going against that, the technocratic guy who thinks that we can actually solve environmental problems using technology or something else. You can have a technocratic view saying that, oh yes, wise people can handle these emerging risks from technologies. We shouldn't be allowing people to play around with it too much. But in practice, understanding and having nuance about your critique, about your culture, about technologies, about the way of going around, that is necessary. The open source movement in software realized that we need to take back control over our software from big corporations. At the same time, the AI safety movement realized, yeah, but we have this paradox. If everybody has access to cutting-edge AI, if that AI turns out to be very dangerous, the open source is not going to be helpful, it's going to be harmful. But then again, we don't really want to hand it over to governments or big corporations either. We have a profound problem where we need to innovate something new. And that innovation, of course, is always disruptive. Like Beatrice, I'm from Sweden. And in Sweden, we have very much of a consensus culture. We all get together, sip our coffee, and discuss until we all agree what should be done. This works really well as long as everybody is the same, as we all tend to agree with each other. And it's really problematic if you get that guy in the room who says, no, you're wrong. I'm going to show why you're wrong. Who invited that guy? That's a problem. The entrepreneur is really outrageous. He doesn't go for a democratic vote, but he just goes out there to disrupt things and innovate. But we need them. One of the problems of Scandinavia is that we need to be open without losing the good part of consensus. We need the critiques of progress without losing sight that actually progress is possible, and that is why we have lowered infant mortality and the extreme poverty and so on. So the tricky part here is having that nuance, because nuance is hard. It's hard to maintain, and quite often we slip up even when we're trying at it.
Do you have any thoughts on, like, all of you, how can we do the balancing act of, like, taking the risks seriously enough, but also making sure that we're, forward-leaning enough that we capture the upside?
That's a tough question. I think the only way to achieve balance is through action, to making things, and it can sound ironic from a point of view of writer that we are supposed to live behind a screen, but if you don't observe your reality, if you don't want to got things changed, you got to go. We're working actually on a project to emancipate science fiction from books and movies and make oral stories, science fiction that can be told in these populations of the Andes and the Amazon. So we can regain this kind of contact, the contact that put people in the origin and the fire at the center, so we can tell stories about technologies. We want to talk about, we're struggling right now to find some post-capitalist science fiction, but we're not seeing pre-capitalistic science fiction. That is the system very interesting. And we have to work with writers so they can acknowledge that every paragraph you write on a blank screen is a political choice. So I think that's the only way, and finding the balance between the different ways to understand science fiction. Yeah, I think that's it.
I think for me, what is really needed is to go back to the sense of community that has gone lost with modern times. We are more and more into an individualistic society where sometimes it becomes always harder to share what we think in an open way because we are so used to be on our own, have our own opinions, and going back to sitting around a fire and also looking at the culture and sitting in majalis and talking with the elders, with the younger generations, the sharing of the fear, of the problem, of the challenge, of the opportunity is very, very important. And I think we've lost that sharing among us and the finding a solution together. It's true that it's hard to discuss, and many times you'll find different opinions, but that friction is what is going to actually initiate the solution. And if you have that person, of that group of people who will try for the not agreeable solution, not the right one, but they will try it, at least there's a proof of we tried, we failed. But if they tried and actually succeeded, that's what has happened in progress. It was people who tried because everyone was against them, but they tried anyway. And we need to foster that. We need to foster the doesn't matter if you're going to fail. And this is another problem of our society. We are afraid of failing. And this is where also we need to push not only the younger generation, even our generation, to try anyway. Failure is not something bad, but at least it gives us the data and the reason why we cannot go that way. So I think if we are able to work more together, make sure that we feel as part of a community. And here in the UAE and in the region, we are a very transient population, a lot of expats. And I think what the government has been able to do is to really make everyone feel like you are here and you belong. That sense of belonging is very important, because then you can feel part of the solution. And how many of us actually have been here for 5, 10, 20 years, and they've set up business, a startup, brought new technologies, new ideas, and that is changing the way we actually see the future. So that mentality of everything's possible, try for it, and let's do it together, I think is really forward-thinking and a solution for the future.
Yeah, I think it's a bit like that internet meme. You can just do things. And I find that interesting because, in some sense, it's a very trite and simple statement. But actually getting up from your chair and actually doing something is surprisingly rare. And I noticed that quite often we believe that we're very constrained. We think that there are rules. Maybe what will the neighbors say? Where do I get funding? And they act as very convenient rationalizations for not doing anything. But when you actually start working on something, quite often you realize, wait a minute, a lot of those constraints were totally illusionary. I remember when I started a think tank in Sweden some years back. And first of all, a bunch of students doing something part-time. Oh, it wasn't harder than that to start a company. Actually, we became a multinational company because several of us were distributed in different countries. And this was working pretty well. And then we got asked by some friends in Norway, who gave you permission? And of course, nobody gave us permission. We just did it. But our friends were thinking that you needed permission to make a think tank that could actually have political impact. We also realized this was not terribly hard. We're going to get a lot of competition here. Crickets. Nope. Eventually, we had to close the think tank because we were too busy with other things. But the thing that there was an open space where you could make something had been lost on so many people. And I think that is a problem. But also getting back to that thing about conversations. I do a lot of bioethics. Often I get into intense debates about the ethics of genetic enhancement, improving the brain, life extension. And most of the arguments I've heard them 100 times before, and they're possible to show that they don't work as ethical arguments. And then people get over to practical arguments. What about overpopulation? What about dictators running forever? And you can knock them down too with rational counter-argument. But what it's real about is worldviews. And these days I try to speed run and get to the worldview as fast as possible, because that's of course what we actually all want to talk about. My view of nature and humanity's future is very different from your view, I would expect. And I think if we had a deep conversation about our worldview, we would learn interesting things and probably find plenty of things we would want to work on together. But despite our other disagreements, here is an opportunity. But it takes too long a time usually in the normal formal debates we have to get to the worldview. So instead we spend time knocking down ethics arguments that have been knocked down 100 times over.
And do you guys have any thoughts on, like, if we agree on that it's important that there is more existential hope in society, like how can we get it out there? What do we need to do now to make it more mainstream and make it happen?
besides making meme pictures about it.
Besides
I would like to point out that the Foresight Institute has a competition for best existential hope meme picture. I think Sunday is the deadline. They need your contributions.
Thank you for the plug, Anders. This is true. Please go to existentialhope.com and submit a meme before Sunday, and you can win $10,000.
Oh, nice.
So that's one thing we're trying.
For the part of our magazine, I think it's the hardest part of our work. It's a hard thing to explain because it can sound very confrontational, but you have to let the classics die. And I think it's very dangerous because I'm pretty sure that if we have the opportunity to talk with Isaac Asimov and Ray Bradbury, they should tell us, okay, move forward. You're reading stuff written by some guy 60 years ago, 70 years ago. Let me rest, let me put in the classic section and move forward and read more contemporary science fiction. There are plenty of authors out there. Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein when she was 19, and how many Mary Shelleys are out there that are writing in Tamil Nadu or in Sichuanese dialect that we don't know. So that's why we think that translation is important. And it's a political action. And it's a hard thing to explain because all these big fans of the classic, they come, okay, oh, you're so wrong. But well, if of 10 people, 8 hate us, maybe these other 2 people has really starting to think, oh, maybe that's true. So maybe I should observe my time and talk about the future I'm living in. I come back to the term of success and failure. Stories define the way we conceive success and failure and conflict. Conflict is not always confrontation. There's not always one hero. Not always one person can change the world, but as we know in Latin America, a big bunch of people can do it. So yeah, I think that making narratives and being very aware on how video games are shaping the minds of the youth. Video games that are built upon accumulation systems and this system that are like, you have more coins, you are a better player. If you pay more for upgrades, you're a better player. And this how the kids are being taught about how to live in this system. And I think we have to tackle that idea.
Design better video games.
I think there is a deep truth there, actually. Hope is much more about our cultural artifacts and our way of seeing the world that is embodied in these artifacts than it's about facts. Our World in Data is one of the most useful websites ever because it's trying to give actually the correct view of what is the actual state of the world, where are the problems, where are things going well. But that's facts. If you believe that the world is going down, then you're not going to look at that, and you're not going to be particularly impressed by all the curves going up, because you're going to just be looking at the curves going down and showing that everything's getting worse. The real stories we tell each other are quite often based on pictures of the future. We have iconic views, which are sometimes very distorted. Computer games, by their nature, they're like accumulation. When it comes to good pictures of the future, quite often many of them are the ones that are salient, to give us strong emotions, but not necessarily correct ones. When talking about AI safety, for many years I was suffering that everybody were always putting up a picture of a Terminator robot. And it's getting at something, yes. The advanced AI can be very dangerous. The problem is, however, not the overt violence. Fortunately, because it was a shift a few years back because of the movie Ex Machina. So instead of getting the Terminator skeleton robot, you got this dancer robot that is just quietly doing something. She's still equally problematic in many ways, but it's a different image. And inventing those images that we use to think about the future is important. And this is where I think memes might be a little bit of a joke, but I do think that we need these transient images, these stories we tell each other at the dinner table or make part of our corporate agendas. They are where we can actually get hope. This is where we can say what we're hoping for in our family, what we're hoping for in our company, what we're hoping our institute or university or society can achieve.
I agree. I think from my point of view, I feel that creativity is an element that is very important in everything we do. And sometimes we are not fostering so much in modern times the creative aspect. How can we think creatively about a better future? Also, we cannot all do the same thing. And I think if we want really, in a sustainable way, think about the future, we need to have all the different talents and the different types of people. We cannot have only people thinking about the future, only people related to technology. We need to have the thinker, the disruptor. We have the person who needs to be the creative. We need to have different elements in our community to foster diversity. That diversity will give creativity to find solutions. So we really need to look at our youth and understand how I can foster that diversity for everyone to find their purpose, because without a purpose, we don't see hope in the future. We do whatever the society tells us to do, and we go on with it, and a lot of people in our societies are actually depressed because they don't have a deeper purpose, neither personal, neither in their companies. They don't see a future because of that lack of purpose. So purpose also needs inspiration. And so inspiration also is given by change makers, those people who will do things differently. So I go back to really helping people who feel differently to feel in a safe space and continue to feel and have different ideas, because from there we can actually find a lot of solutions. So it's about diversity and a deeper purpose, I think. And to go back to what you were saying before on how many people today actually feel around the world. I don't know how familiar you are with eco-anxiety. It's a phenomena that has been growing in the past 10 years around the world, specifically with youth, where they feel this anxiety of not being able to do anything for their future. And so it's a clinical thing, mainly in the US and in Europe, but we had the first cases of eco-anxiety here in the UAE, in local clinics and hospitals, where you have people who feel anxious and are not able to do anything in their life because they don't see this future. So we need to change the way we talk about the future. We need to be more positive. It's not about being naive, but it's about really setting things differently in our mind and visualize. And I think the visualization of a better future is very important. And we need to do this everywhere, at work, in schools, in our society. We need to think positively that we can do something. And we go back to the meaning of hope is being able to do something and create action.
I'll ask you guys one short question before we also open up if anyone else has any questions. But I think on the note of like inspiration being important, what's one thing that recently you've come across that has, inspired you and given you hope for the future?
We do this thing in Lima. Actually, we've done 4 editions in Rome and 2 in Lima, 3 in Lima. That is called the Future Clubs, when we put together scientists and innovators with science fiction writers. So we can connect scientists and innovators at a human level with science fiction writers, so we can understand what moves these big innovators. And I think that the human part of science fiction is very important. So that's what inspires me and everyone. There are very informal places of meeting in some bars in Lima, in the Bohemian district, and so you can know a person. Beyond these big ideas, you see a child that once had a dream to become scientist because they grew up in a very poor part of the town, for example. So you can connect with the human level, and that inspires science fiction writers. That's important. The human part inspires us to do science fiction, not just the technology, because behind that technology is a human dream, a human being, or a startup with a dream. So I think that's the important part. Yeah.
So I was recently doing a week at a course about artificial intelligence for law students at a fairly middling Swedish university in a fairly minor town. And these law students had a kind of other anxiety, not eco-anxiety, but the realization that our job might get wiped out by AI. But nobody really knows anything about anything. And during this week, I had them play around with AI and actually do an exercise in learning how to get AI to write an essay, but also discussing what we learned from the process. And the thing that gives me hope is that on Friday, that was one of the best research seminars I ever been to, because these students were discovering new things about what artificial intelligence reasoning can and cannot do in law, what it gets right, what it gets wrong, methods of using it. And in many cases, sometimes we rediscovered, but quite often we discovered things that people had not been aware of in the artificial intelligence field itself. And when they realized, wow, we reached the cutting edge here, but we're undergraduate students at a middling university in the middle of nowhere, Sweden. Yep, this is the short distance to the cutting edge, and you can participate there. That filled both me and the students with hope.
I second the same thinking. Through our different initiatives in regenerative agriculture or oceans and working with universities and academic centers, what gives us hope is to see the amount of innovations that are coming through and research and data that prove that there are solutions out there that sometimes are very simple, accessible to all, and not always expensive or really far away, that can enable people everywhere in the world to grow better food, to have clean air, to have clean water. And this for me is real hope, is where I see tangible things that are accessible and doable immediately, that we could take and bring to a farmer or to a community in Asia or in Africa, and that immediately they can feed their families, grow food, have a healthcare solution. So it's very positive. It's out there, and I think we just need to shine the spotlight more on these, support them more, fund them more as well, and enlarge this community of change makers.
Well, thank you for a great panel. It's extremely aligned with what I do. I am a young AI leader, and I lead the Bogota Foundation, and it's part of AI for Good. So we're all about AI for Good. And for me, that has been my process, through inspiration, through skills, empowerment, and connecting to a greater purpose to find meaning in such uncertain times. For me, I just wanted to ask you more practically, what activities or what format of engagement with youth has been the most catalyzing for meaning formation, for like impact and mobilization, as I'm trying to figure out my strategy and the foundation and the global impact we're having?
Recently, what I can see is that to join global organizations that have chapters around the world focusing on impact from different points of view, so AI for Good, or impact investment for good, or education for good, finding that kind of support group where there's an exchange of ideas, technologies, where you have a community that supports you is really interesting. Recently, we had a dinner as part of the TTI network, Top Tier Impact Invest. They are in 45 different countries, and they support any kind of innovation. They have investor in it, they have angel investors, they have new technologies, very nascent to more developed. And to be honest, the support they give across the world to each other and empowering each other is fantastic. And I think you have many other networks similar to this. So the more you're able to feel and to be part of these communities of founders or change makers is very important, I feel. So you're not on your own.
And do you have any more questions?
There is one over there.
Oh.
Thank you. I have two questions for the panel. One is more directed at César, I guess, and the other is for the entire panel, including the moderator, if the moderator wishes. My first question is about the structure of language. So, César, you were referring to the Sapir-Whorf conjecture. The syntactic grammatical structure of a language shapes the way we think thoughts. Is there, in your experience, language that you've seen that is more open or suitable for thinking about hope? So is there a more hopeful language? And my second point is about the definition of existential hope. We've heard that existential hope is the opposite of existential risk. Is there a better definition? Because while existential risk is well defined in wiping out the human race, there are many different ways in which this can be the polar opposite.
Well, about Quechua, I think that Quechua has a great capability to think about not just about the future, but about our relationship with nature. For example, in Quechua, you can have a male river or a female river. You can have a male mountain or a female mountain. So we have this term, I think you somehow heard about the Pachamama, this is the Mother Earth. But for example, Pacha in Quechua is space, but it's also time. That is a very complex context that we came to understand for these big scientific theories. But back in those days, they talk about the Pacha as is space and time. So they have this way to cope with the future, very interesting way to cope with the future, and with feelings. They don't have words like goodbye. They say like embrace with the heart. And so this kind of language made by human contact with the earth and with each other. So I think that's a very interesting point to start thinking about the future. Start thinking about the feelings that move us as a society. They have like 5 different words to say work, for example. This is a work you do for your friends. This is a work you do for your community. There's a work you do for yourself. And it's a very complex system to understand in the world we're living in. But Quechua is an invisibilized language because it has its relationship with low incomes. So I, as a Spanish speaker, I don't understand Quechua. I cannot talk Quechua because I come from a colonized culture. That is the capital. But I think that our main objective is to understand these communities. It's not always an easy task. They're not always open to let colonial Spanish-speaking people to their communities. It's not always, well, be welcome, please be my guest, and I can tell you all I know about the world. But we're making some efforts. There are so many languages. For example, Arabic language has a very straightforward way of conceive things that I love, because when you talk about science, we have this way to communicate, and it's very impressive. We've done the 3rd issue of the magazine is centered on Arabic science fiction. And we found very deep and beautiful ways to cope with death. It's a shame that it's only in Spanish, but you can find, I guess, the 4th issue of the magazine is centered on the Greek science fiction. And they have also this deep relationship with water invading cities. So very complex philosophical concept that can only be achieved in Greek or maybe German, that it's a language very interesting for making new concepts, like a Lego system. So you can group new concepts with that kind of languages. So that's why it's important. Yeah, yes, that's in terms of the language. Any language has its own value to think about the future.
But thinking about the definition of existential hope, the original paper by Toby Ord and Owen Cotton Barrett that defined the existential hope in a particular way has a definition that's fairly different from what the Foresight Institute is actually doing.
Yeah.
And that is the wonder of language, of course. Words have flexible meanings. Indeed, existential risk is getting used by a lot of people to mean serious threats to something. People talk about an existential risk to the company. But of course, the rest of society might not care too much if a company goes bust. For a long time, I struggled. I wanted to keep the concept of existential risk pure, only about the really biggest threats, transgenerational threats to all of humanity, or rather Earth-originating intelligent life, or maybe the biosphere too. But then I realized that actually, you want to communicate. You want to figure out what you're communicating about. So I think looking at existential risk and sometimes defining it a bit more tightly, quite often figure out what kind of context are we trying to use. When I talk about existential hope, who am I talking to? What is the purpose of this? For example, this conversation is very much futurists getting together, and we're sharing our views on how we go about doing our futuring stuff. And we're tremendously diverse. We have very different cultures, different styles of futurism, different aims. But we also want to have a shared language, and then we're going to take the concepts home and make them ours. And I think that is the way of also making sure that you handle these concepts well and respectfully. You try to define them in your conversation. But at the same time, you should be aware that they're going to be shaped by the conversation. At the end, the concept might not mean what it started with. It might be shaped a lot by language. I have a real problem that in Swedish, risk and chance are essentially the same word. So I quite often mix up when I talk about the chance of a nuclear war. And then everybody cringes, because of course it should be a risk, it should be the negative thing. And yes, oh dear, I need to remember that. But sometimes, of course, that allows interesting wordplay, different ways of expressing oneself. So I'm rather happy that we can be flexible with these words. As a philosopher and sometimes mathematician, I like very strict definitions, but they don't really work for real things. And I think existential hope is much more like a real thing.
Yeah, and I should say actually the paper Existential Risk and Existential Hope that we originally took the term from, Owen, one of the co-authors, came up to me and said he apologized for having such a strict definition because he didn't think anyone was going to use it. And he's very happy with letting us use it the way we are, which I think generally just like very positive futures. That's it, like thinking a bit more ambitiously about how good the future could be. Thank you so much to the panel, and thank you all so much for coming.